Your mouth is full of dirt, not soil, dirt. Gritty, mineral-heavy clay that coats your tongue and sticks between your teeth. Your ancestors knelt beside a termite mound in what is now Tanzania and ate fistfuls of it. And they did not do this because they were starving. They did it because their bodies told them to. Today, roughly 2 billion people across the planet still practice geophagy, the deliberate consumption of Earth. And most of them have no idea they are repeating a behavior older than agriculture itself. You think of food as something that grew or walked or swam. Your ancestors thought bigger. They looked at a landscape and saw a pharmacy, a hardware store, a pantry with no walls. When archaeologist Curtis Moran excavated Pinnacle Point Cave in South Africa, he found something that changed the timeline of human intelligence. Shells, thousands of them. Brown mussels, limpets, whelks. But these were not leftovers from a beach picnic. They were dated to 164,000 years ago, and they represented the oldest confirmed evidence of humans systematically harvesting shellfish. Your ancestors were cracking open mollusks on rocks before they invented the bow and arrow, but shellfish were the easy part. Your body needs about 2,000 calories a day to function. Your Paleolithic ancestors needed closer to 3,000 because they walked between 8 and 15 kilometers daily just to survive. They could not afford to be picky, so they ate bark. They ate insects. They ate things that would make you gag if you saw them on a plate today. And they did it not out of desperation, but out of knowledge passed down across thousands of generations. Let's start with the thing that disgusts modern people the most. Larvae. Fat. Wriggling grubs pulled from rotting logs. The Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies on Earth, still seek out these protein bombs. Anthropologist Frank Marlowe spent years documenting their diet and found that a single handful of palm weevil larvae delivers more protein and fat than a comparable portion of beef. Your ancestors in Europe did the same thing. At the Dolní Vostony site in the Czech Republic, researchers found evidence that people 30,000 years ago were roasting moth larvae over open fires, not as a last resort, as a staple. Here is the twist. Those larvae were not just protein, they were medicine. The fats inside insect larvae contain compounds that reduce inflammation and support brain development. Your species did not grow the largest brain-to-body ratio on the planet by accident. You ate your way there. And you ate things that would never appear on a modern menu. Clay and dirt were not accidental snacks. They were intentional. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, anthropologist Tim Berra documented communities that still prepare clay tablets as a side dish, especially for pregnant women. The clay binds to toxins in the gut, absorbs excess stomach acid, and delivers trace minerals like calcium and zinc. Your ancestors did not have prenatal vitamins. They had termite mounds. Primatologist Sabrina Creve found that chimpanzees in Uganda eat specific types of clay when they are sick, selecting soils rich in kaolin, the same compound in modern anti-diarrheal medicine. Your lineage learned this trick millions of years ago and never forgot it. Bone marrow was not a delicacy. It was survival. At the Swartkrans Cave in South Africa, paleoanthropologist Bob Brain found bones that had been systematically smashed open 2 million years ago, not by teeth, by stones. Your ancestors were using tools to crack open the long bones of antelopes and zebras to scoop out the marrow inside, a jelly-like substance that contains more calories per gram than almost any other part of the animal. While lions and hyenas fought over muscle and organ meat, your ancestors waited. They let the predators eat their fill, then moved in with rocks and scraped out the one thing those carnivores could not reach. Your species built its success on leftovers, but marrow was rich, and richness came with a cost. Your body can only process so much fat at once before it triggers nausea and diarrhea, a condition scientists call rabbit starvation or protein poisoning. Your ancestors learned to balance their marrow meals with plant fiber, roots, tubers. And this is where things get stranger. You probably think of roots as bland starch, the boring part of a meal. Your ancestors saw them as survival engines. In the Kalahari Desert, anthropologist Richard Lee spent time with the Jew/Hoansi people in the 1960s and documented their reliance on the mongongo nut and the /sha root, a tuber so fibrous and bitter that it requires hours of processing before it becomes edible. The women would dig it up, pound it with stones, leach it in water, then roast it over coals. This was not optional, this was chemistry. Many wild tubers contain cyanogenic glycosides, compounds that release cyanide when you chew them. Your ancestors learned to detoxify their food using nothing but water, heat, and patience. At Monteverde in Chile, archaeologist Tom Dillahay uncovered evidence that people 14,000 years ago were eating wild potato species and seaweed carried inland from the coast. Seaweed in the mountains. Your ancestors were trading, transporting, and preserving marine algae because they understood something modern nutritionists only confirmed in the last century. Seaweed is one of the only plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids and iodine, nutrients critical for thyroid function and brain health. They did not have blood tests, they had observation and memory. Then there is fermentation. You think of fermentation as a way to make alcohol or preserve cucumbers. Your ancestors used it to survive winter. At the Ohalo 2 site in Israel, researchers found 23,000-year-old grinding stones covered in residues of wild barley and wheat. But these grains were not just ground, they were soaked, allowed to sprout, then ground again. This is malting, the first step in making beer, but it is also a way to break down phytic acid, a compound in grains that blocks your intestines from absorbing iron and zinc. Your ancestors were biotechnologists. They hacked their food at the molecular level using nothing but time and moisture. And they ate rot. Controlled rot. Anthropologist and microbiologist Christina Werner studies ancient dental calculus, the hardened plaque on fossilized teeth, and she has found microscopic evidence that Neanderthals were consuming fermented plant material. Not by accident. They were chewing medicinal plants like yarrow and chamomile, plants that have no caloric value but contain compounds that reduce pain and kill bacteria. Your cousins were self-medicating 50,000 years ago. Blood was not taboo, it was liquid food. Among the Maasai herders of East Africa, anthropologist Elliot Fradkin documented the practice of drawing small amounts of blood from cattle using a carefully placed arrow, mixing it with milk, and drinking it as a high-protein beverage. This was not ritual, this was logistics. You could extract nutrients from an animal without killing it, which meant your herd stayed alive and you stayed fed. Your ancestors likely did the same thing with reindeer in Ice Age Europe. No domestication, just strategy. Here's what surprises people the most. Your ancestors were not just desperate, they were selective. Archaeologist Sarah Elton analyzed cut marks on animal bones from Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania and found that early humans were targeting specific body parts: tongues, eyeballs, brains. These were not the easiest parts to access, but they were the richest in fat, soluble vitamins like D and K2, nutrients that only come from animal sources and that your body cannot synthesize on its own. Your ancestors understood nutrient density before the term existed. They also ate charcoal, not by mistake. Activated charcoal, the kind you now buy in capsules at pharmacies, was used by hunter-gatherers to treat poisoning. Anthropologist Karen Hardy found starch granules embedded in Neanderthal teeth at El Cedron Cave in Spain, but she also found particles of wood ash and charcoal. Your relatives were consuming carbon to neutralize plant toxins, possibly after eating wild pulses or bitter greens. They did not have a poison control center. They had fire and memory. Eggs were treasures, but not the way you think. Your ancestors did not wait for chickens to lay them in a coop. They climbed cliffs for seabird eggs. They raided termite mounds for insect eggs the size of rice grains. They dug up turtle nests on beaches and ate the eggs raw, shell and all, because the shell itself was a source of calcium. There was no waste. Every part of every organism had a purpose. And then there were the things that were not technically food, but that kept your ancestors alive anyway. Tree bark. Not the outer bark, but the cambium layer, the soft tissue just beneath it. In Scandinavia, Sami herders still harvest the inner bark of pine trees in early summer when the sap is running. It tastes faintly sweet and delivers a hit of vitamin C, a nutrient that becomes scarce in northern winters when there are no fruits or greens. Your ancestors in Ice Age Europe did the same thing. Archaeologist Marion Van Haren found perforated bark fragments at sites in France that show evidence of being chewed, not carved. Your relatives were eating trees. Lichen was another non-food food. It grows on rocks in the coldest, most barren environments on Earth, and it is almost indigestible unless you know how to prepare it. The interior Salish people of British Columbia would harvest black tree lichen, pit cook it for up to 2 days, then form it into cakes and store it for winter. Anthropologist Nancy Turner documented this process and found that cooking breaks down the lichen's complex carbohydrates into usable sugars. Your ancestors turned rocks into bread. Even fat itself was eaten in ways that would horrify you now. Rendered fat was stored in intestines, tied off at both ends, and buried in cold ground to preserve it for months. This was not gross. This was engineering. At the Galt site in Texas, researchers found evidence that Clovis people 13,000 years ago were processing mammoth fat and storing it in hide containers. One mammoth could yield over 200 kilograms of fat, enough to sustain a group through an entire winter. Your ancestors did not waste the hunt, they liquefied it. So why does all of this matter? Because your body still remembers. You crave fat when you are stressed because your ancestors needed calorie-dense food to survive cold and scarcity. You feel satisfied after eating bone broth because your gut recognizes collagen and gelatin as ancient signals of a successful hunt. You reach for chocolate when you are sad because cacao contains compounds that mimic the neurochemicals your ancestors got from eating liver and brain tissue. Your cravings are not mistakes. They are echoes. Today, the average person in an industrialized country eats fewer than 30 different species of plants and animals in an entire year. Your ancestors ate over 200. They knew which mushrooms cured infections, which roots stopped diarrhea, which leaves brought down fever. They carried entire ecosystems in their heads. And they taught their children not with textbooks, but with taste and survival. You live in a world where food comes in packages and nutrition comes in pills. Your ancestors lived in a world where food was everything else. And the strangest part? They did not see any of it as strange. To them, clay was food. Larvae were food. Bark was food. Survival was not about what tasted good. It was about what kept you alive long enough to pass that knowledge forward. Your mouth is full of dirt. But now you know why.